Hello and welcome, I'm Pip Tomson and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. South Korean lawmakers have voted to lift martial law just hours after the country's president declared it. NATO accuses Russia of using Ukraine as a testing ground for experimental missiles, calling Putin's actions reckless. And the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah is on the brink of collapse as airstrikes and mortar attacks are fired on either side. Hello to you, welcome to W News. We are going to be talking about what is happening in South Korea very shortly, but first to the Middle East. And the Lebanon ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah could collapse after both sides have attacked. 10 people were killed in southern Lebanon last night by Israeli forces who struck Hezbollah fighters for so-called hostile activity. It was retaliation for Hezbollah firing at an Israeli army base over what they called repeated violations by Israel. We will bring you more on that very shortly. But first of all, I want to bring you some of the other stories making the headlines today. Joe Biden was in Angola, southern Africa earlier as the US marked the two countries' shared history in the transatlantic slave trade. The outgoing US president was helped up a step by Angolan President Juan Lourenço during a media appearance. It's thought the visit will be Biden's last foreign trip before he leaves the Oval Office in January. French lawmakers will vote on a no-confidence motion on Wednesday evening, which could topple Michel Barnier's government. If ousted, it would be the first French administration to be forced out in this capacity in over 60 years, while the country also battles a financial crisis. Vietnamese businesswoman Troy My Lan has lost an appeal against her death sentence after being found guilty of bank fraud in April. Over the course of 10 years, Troy My Lan stole a total of $44 billion, taking out loans and cash. Her sentence will be downgraded to life imprisonment if she is able to pay back $9 billion. That's 3/4 of the $12 billion she embezzled. She can also petition the president for amnesty for a chance to spare her life. And the fate of the Elgin marbles remains unknown as British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer visits his Greek counterpart today. Downing Street has confirmed the antiquities, also known as the Parthenon marbles, are not on the agenda. That's despite a disagreement between the former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Kyriakos Mitsotakis last year on whether they should return to Athens. Let's return to the Middle East and the Lebanon ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah, which could collapse after both sides attacked. 10 people were killed in southern Lebanon last night by Israeli forces who struck Hezbollah fighters for so-called hostile activity. It was retaliation for Hezbollah firing at an Israeli army base over what they called repeated violations by Israel. For more on this, I'm joined from Jerusalem by journalist Noga Tarnopolsky. Hello to you, Noga. Thanks for talking to me on W News. Looking at what is happening here, how fragile does this ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel appear to be right now? Because I notice the United States are saying that it is largely holding.
Right. It's as fragile as any ceasefire can be during what I would say is a preliminary period when some hands might be a bit loose on the triggers. In this case, we also have this new development, this uprising in Syria, which is the country through which Iran has been sending weapons and armaments to Hezbollah. and where Israel has been bombarding regularly those same, weapons envoys. So I think it's a very hot and volatile area, and these are still the first few days of this ceasefire. In addition, there's the political framework in Israel in which you saw the prime minister today, instead of boasting about his achievement in achieving this ceasefire, he reassured his cabinet, don't worry, the war's not over yet. This is just a temporary ceasefire. So we also have to keep on our eyes and our ears open to these kind of statements, especially before Trump returns to office, I would say.
What have Israeli officials said about these accusations of breaching the terms of this agreement?
Israeli officials, by and large, Netanyahu's ministers are they're a very loud bunch, and they have made some very bombastic statements, even in the past 24 hours, basically saying if this is how Hezbollah is going to behave and they're going to shoot our military bases, we're re-entering Gaza with more weapons blaring, even stronger than before. Even the army yesterday, which is less usual, put out a very belligerent statement, basically saying we're ready to, relaunch this war at any minute and we're ready to go. So the atmosphere, the general atmosphere in the Israeli public sphere is very, very hot to trot. And really, I have to say that the population itself of Israel, the general population, hasn't been told that much about the ceasefire or what it might be achieving for them. And on the other hand, the residents of the north, the evacuated residents of the north, so let's say between 70 and 80,000 people, were explicitly told that they cannot go back, that this is not considered safe yet. And today, Prime Minister Netanyahu held a kind of cabinet meeting, a for-show cabinet meeting in the Galilee, to which neither citizens nor any of the northern mayors or officials were invited. It was really just a photo op. So Israeli officials, let's say, are not really giving this ceasefire much PR, and they're not giving the Israeli people much of a chance to understand what it could mean for them.
I mean, for some people, it looks to an outsider that both Israel and Lebanon are looking for any opportunity to break it. They almost don't want it to hold.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a very understandable impression, and there's a lot of basis for that feeling. I would say the Israeli government and Hezbollah, in that case, more than Lebanon, that is almost, strange as it is to say, almost a bystander to this terrible war on its own territory. But the Lebanese South and a lot of the Lebanese political sphere has been taken over by Hezbollah with some violence. And so the war Hezbollah launched on October 8th, 2023 against Israel has happened not on behalf of the Lebanese armed forces, or really, I have to say, on behalf of the Lebanese people, but was Hezbollah attempting to show its solidarity with Hamas that had attacked Israel the day before. And Israel chose at that time almost to ignore Hezbollah. It did evacuate the whole zone, but it ignored it and focused on the south. And those are the political consequences we're seeing today. For the Lebanese people who have almost no voice in this entire situation, it's just an unimaginable tragedy.
And for people on both sides, in northern Israel and for Lebanese people wanting to get back to their homes, have many returned now, or are they largely staying away because they're too scared to go home? And of course, for some people, they don't have a home left.
Right. There are a lot of people who don't have homes left. On the Israeli side, no one has gone home except some people who have allowed themselves to go visit and go see what's left of their home for the first time in 14 months. No one has moved back, mostly because there's nowhere to move back to. There are no schools, there aren't facilities. The government has not budgeted to rebuild this entire piece of land. But in addition, the Israelis have received explicit orders from the military authorities who are in charge of that whole border area not to return home. They're not permitted. They'll be stopped. On the Lebanese side, at least in the first 2 days of this ceasefire, it was a bit trickier. The Lebanese army that is supposed to take over southern Lebanon from Hezbollah and the Israeli army that's still on site both told Lebanese civilians not to return home. Nonetheless, thousands did try to come home. That kind of avalanche of people trying to return home has slowed significantly. Maybe people are starting to obey the orders. Maybe they realize they still have to be afraid. But it has slowed. Nonetheless, on the Lebanese side, there are many more civilians for now than on the Israeli side. And I think we're going to have to just sit tight and see how these 6 weeks pass, and if the parties take advantage of this period of time to negotiate what could be a more enduring truce for the region.
We will, of course, stay across it here on W News. Journalist Noga Tarnopolsky, thank you so much for talking to me.
My pleasure.
Moving on to Russia now, and NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte has said Russia's aggression shows no signs of abating as Putin ramps up his rhetoric and reckless actions. Speaking in Brussels today, the NATO chief accused the Russian leader of using Ukraine as a testing ground for experimental missiles in what he described as an illegal war. It comes as Russia captures 2 more villages in Ukraine and struck energy sites overnight in Ternopil, close to the Polish border. I'm joined from Moscow by our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova. Dasha, good to see you again. NATO foreign ministers, they've been meeting today, and there's been a lot of talk that a peace deal is coming. It's not far away. What is likely to make Putin want to sit round the table?
Well, certainly what Moscow says is that freezing the conflict along the current lines of confrontation is completely out of question. Moscow insists that the goals of its so-called special military operation have to be achieved, and this is demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. So what will make Moscow get to a negotiating table, we understand, is the very idea of Russia being provided with certain security guarantees that Ukraine will not be used as a weapon, as Russia insists it is, against Moscow. So certainly from the Russian perspective, for any plans that are that are being circulated in the Western media at the moment, they are not providing for Russia's concerns. They are not alleviating them. So Moscow insists those are half measures, and Moscow will not allow the Western countries just to give some respite to this conflict. In the meantime, giving Ukraine more arms and rearming the country once again. So from the Russian perspective, what is needed is that Ukraine gets a neutral status, that it is not getting to NATO. And actually what we have seen today also is the discussion of Ukraine actually being provided with the NATO membership. With regard to that, the Kremlin has on Tuesday said very clearly that this will be seen in Moscow as potentially unacceptable and threatening to Russia, because Moscow insists this is countering the very principle of indivisibility of security, when the security of one country is being provided at the expense of the security of another country, and Moscow says that is a non-starter.
Putin has signed off his country's budget, hasn't he, which includes a record amount of spending on defence. Now, can we take that as an indication that he's committed to prolonging this war?
Well, it is certainly an indication that Russia understands that this conflict is going to last for quite some time, and Moscow has from the very beginning been saying that it is ready for that. The whole economy has actually been restructured, and if you look at the Russian economy at the moment, it is, many experts say, functioning based on the defense sector, and Moscow insists that the increase in the military budget was actually necessary. We don't know the full extent of how much the budget on defense, national security, security and other purposes has been extended, because some of the titles in this budget go under the title of a top secret. So we don't know the exact number, but what we have seen was the very fact that Russia has been increasing its defense budget over the course of the past years, and it is now at the record high, and we understand it is exceeding 6% of the country's GDP, something which is higher than the indicators back in the Cold War. So it is definitely an indication that Moscow is here in that for the long haul. But what Moscow also is saying, that it is just not just the fight with Ukraine, but it is taking so much time, Moscow says, because this conflict has long involved Western countries, and Russia is fighting not just with Ukraine, but also with the entire Western world. And that's why Moscow says it has to have the means to defend itself. And actually, we've heard the Russian president recently saying that Russia has started the serial production of its Oreshnik experimental intermediate weapon. And Moscow insists that it is going to develop even more types of weapons that will be necessary for Russia's sovereignty and territorial integrity to be preserved.
Russian drone strikes have been hitting energy infrastructure in the west of Ukraine. What more can you tell us about that? Is he trying to, if you like, just wear people down now?
Well, again, the official position here in Moscow is that Russia is targeting the targets in Ukraine that are one way or another related to the military-industrial complex. So what we have heard from the Russian Ministry of Defense was that in 142 regions and areas of Ukraine, Moscow has hit the energy facilities that have been provided for the military-industrial complex, the infrastructure of the military airfields, and this is what Moscow says it has been doing to demilitarize Ukraine.
Dasha, Chernyshova in Moscow, always appreciate it. Thank you very much. To the US now, and President-elect Donald Trump will make his first foreign visit since winning the election. He'll attend the reopening of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris on Saturday, but President Joe Biden will not. A sign that global leaders are fast turning the page on the current US president, who only has 6 weeks now left in power. Kate Fisher reports from Washington.
Fulfilling a promise to visit sub-Saharan Africa as president, Joe Biden's in Angola, seeking to highlight US commitment to the continent in the face of China's aggressive investment there. But his successor is wasting no time taking the international spotlight. The French president's invitation for Donald Trump to attend the unveiling of the newly restored Notre Dame Cathedral, a signal that Macron is deploying the same tactic of flattery that he used with the US president-elect during his first term. But Trump's return to the world stage has also sparked concern among NATO powers. They fear he may fracture the Western military alliance after saying that he'd tell Russia it could do, quote, whatever the hell they want to member states that don't spend enough on defence. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer stressing the importance of supporting Ukraine in its fight against Russia in a speech on Monday.
And let's be clear. The future of freedom in Europe is being decided today. We face a near and present danger, with Russia as an erratic, increasingly desperate aggressor on our continent, marshalling all its resources, along with North Korean troops and Iranian missiles, aiming to kill and to conquer.
Also perhaps an appeal to the incoming US president. Donald Trump is deeply sceptical of US support for Ukraine and has promised to end the war in a day once he takes power. He's certainly not waiting until then to launch his foreign policy, with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau rushing to meet him at his home in Florida after he threatened a trade war with the US's northern neighbour.
It was an excellent conversation.
This, along with his trip to Paris on Saturday, serving to highlight that Donald Trump is the American that foreign leaders want to court, as sitting US President Joe Biden increasingly fades from the international scene. Kate Fisher, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
To a developing story now, and earlier today, South Korea's president declared emergency martial law, accusing the country's opposition of sympathising with North Korea. During a television briefing, Yoon Suk Yeol said he was taking action to protect the Free Republic of Korea from the threat of North Korean communist forces. Opposition lawmakers were initially prevented by the military from entering South Korea's parliament, but in the last hour, MPs have voted to lift the martial law declaration. Now, Barack Obama reunited with the ex-German Chancellor Angela Merkel last night to promote her memoir, Freedom. The two former leaders, who were both in power between 2009 to 2017, discussed working with one another and praised each other's precision for facts. Our correspondent in Berlin, Trent Murray, has been covering this story for us and joins us now. Hello to you, Trent. Good to see you here on W News. A very friendly atmosphere between these two last night. What was their relationship like back in the day?
Well, at one point, former President Obama said that Angela Merkel was his closest ally. Certainly on the world stage, they were two of the most famous political leaders, really, of the 21st century. And they did strike up a friendship that they spoke about in quite detail last night. We know, of course, this is part of Angela Merkel's sort of small world tour that she's taking, launching her memoir, Freedom. It's been many years in the works. It's finally been released. And certainly I think the fact that she chose former President Obama to help launch that book in the United States in its English version is a testament to the fact that she really does see him as one of the closest leaders that she worked with during her time. It wasn't always plain sailing, though. There were some difficulties in the relationship. A real low point, you might recall, was when the NSA of the US was caught tapping Angela Merkel's cell phone here in Berlin. That at the time garnered a lot of anger from her towards the White House. She said friends shouldn't spy on their friends.
Trent, what was discussed during the evening then? Because we know Angela has been critical of President-elect Donald Trump in this memoir. Did that come up in the conversation?
No, it didn't, actually. There were three names that were not mentioned at all during that conversation: Joe Biden, Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. Of course, probably some of those contentious areas that the former Chancellor was hoping to avoid stirring any sort of controversy in the US, just given how difficult things are at the moment there with political rhetoric. But she certainly does talk about some of the challenges she had with former President-elect Trump now during her time in office. She spoke about that awkward encounter where he refused to shake her hand in front of the cameras despite her asking for him. She said at that point she knew that she was going to have to strap in for a difficult relationship between Washington and Berlin. She also said that he really just had what she describes as a property developer's mentality, win or lose. And she said he took that approach even with close allies like Germany. That was certainly her perspective of working with Donald Trump.
Angela Merkel had 4 terms in office, and she's credited for getting Germany and also Europe through the global financial crisis and the euro debt crisis. But she has also been criticised for Germany's dependence on Russian gas and Chinese trade.
Yeah, that's right. And that has garnered some even further criticism here in recent days, with some of her critics saying that the book is sort of full of self-congratulations, as one of her critics here described it, and doesn't make apologies for some of those issues, like the fact that Germany did become very reliant on Russian gas to help power its economy. What she has said in the book is that she made the decisions at the time that she did, thinking they were the best for Germany, but she does admit that she underestimated Vladimir Putin's commitment to wanting to take Ukraine. She did think that there was a diplomatic path through through there, but she says she's now been proven wrong on that. But she also, as you said, spoke about one of the other contentious issues, which is the fact that she let in 1 million refugees during the height of the Syrian crisis. And she said she doesn't regret that at all, because she said it was the necessary decision to take, because she said Germany had to show that it has a heart that was willing to try and help people in their hour of need.
Finally, Trent, there continues to be unrest in Georgia over the decision to shelve plans to join the EU. But Germany is still supporting the country's bid, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. We've had some pretty strong language released from the Chancellery here and the chief government spokesperson saying that Berlin is closely watching what is happening in Georgia, particularly some of those protests in the capital, Tbilisi. And they do say that they support the Georgian people, if indeed they want to remain on that path towards EU membership. We know right now that is looking increasingly challenging, given some of the moves by the government there to back away from the ascendancy path of the EU. But certainly right now, the message coming from the EU's biggest member, Germany, is that it does continue to support Georgia joining the EU, if indeed that is the decision that the Georgian people want to take.
Trent Murray in Berlin, thank you. Let's bring you some of the top business news. And Elon Musk's $55 billion pay package from Tesla has been blocked by a US judge for the second time this year. Despite the money being approved by the board and shareholders, the Delaware court has ruled the payment was too excessive. The judge previously argued that board members were too heavily influenced by Musk. Reacting on his platform X, the tech tycoon said that shareholders should control company votes, not judges. Jaguar say they've shown fearless creativity as they unveiled their new concept car, the Type 00, in Miami this week. The vehicle will not officially go on sale, but the manufacturer believes it will epitomise the brand's 3 production models, which will be available to buy in 2026. The recent advertising campaign and the rebranded logo has garnered worldwide attention. To sport, and the president of the FIA has said he's open to introducing a 12th team to Formula One. It comes after the announcement that General Motors has become the 11th team to join, with their Cadillac due to make its debut in 2026. British boxer Daniel Dubois will defend his world heavyweight title when he faces New Zealand's Joseph Parker in Saudi Arabia in February. Dubois defended his IBF belt when he beat Anthony Joshua at London's Wembley Stadium in September. And former Mexican boxing champion Israel Vázquez has died at the age of 46 after being diagnosed with stage 4 sarcoma. Nicknamed Al Magnifico, the news was announced by the WBC president Mauricio Suleiman. To a developing story now, and earlier today, South Korea's president declared emergency martial law, accusing the country's opposition of sympathising with North Korea. During a television briefing, Yoon Suk Yeol said he was taking action to protect the Free Republic of Korea from the threat of North Korean communist forces. Opposition lawmakers were initially prevented by the military from entering South Korea's parliament, but in the last hour, MPs have voted to lift the martial law declaration. I'm now joined by John Everard, the former British ambassador to North Korea. John, thanks very much for joining me. Do hope you can hear me okay. Let's just get up to date with this, because events have been moving pretty quickly. What has pushed Yoon Suk Yeol to take such serious measures, and how serious is this crisis?
Well, there's 2 questions there. What's pushed him to do it? I think essentially frustration. Yoon Suk Yeol, he was badly hammered in the last parliamentary election in South Korea. He's been running a minority government, and the opposition parties have stymied most of his political agenda. The immediate trigger was the budget, which the opposition was simply voting down. how serious is this? I think basically there are two outcomes. One is that the president has to sign into law the National Assembly vote earlier this evening. Remember, of 190 deputies present, all voted in favour of lifting martial law. In which case his position politically becomes simply untenable and he will have to stand down. Either that or he tries to override the National Assembly, in which case things could get quite ugly. I suspect at that point we would be looking at street demonstrations and possibly even violence, though I very much hope not.
Yeah, I mean, we have already been seeing pictures of those protests. So South Korean MPs, they voted to lift martial law and reverse this decision. It is going to be maintained, say the South Korean military, until it's lifted by the president. Is his role as president now over? Is he done for in light of this?
Possibly. So much depends on what happens in the next few hours. If he accepts the National Assembly resolution and signs into law, then yes, I mean, effectively he's toast. But the big risk is that he tries to face down the National Assembly and ask his military to suppress protests, in which case, I mean, he remains as president, but no longer president of a functioning democracy.
Were you surprised that he did this today? Because it was for the first time, I understand, since 1979. I mean, it seemed like quite a dramatic move, or in your eyes, was it understandable?
Understandable up to a point, in the sense that everybody knew that President Yoon was getting very frustrated. And early this year, some commentators were speculating on the possibility of his declaring martial law. But essentially, this caught everybody by surprise, including quite evidently all regional governments. The silence out of Pyongyang, out of Beijing, even out of Moscow has been deafening. Yoon blindsided everybody. As you say, the first time this happened since 1979, and in fact, by a cruel coincidence, we're just 9 days off the anniversary of the 1979 coup.
What would martial law have entailed, and was it actually lawful? I mean, one of the things is that the media would have been under very strict control as well.
Yes, that's right. Very strict media control, very strict rules against freedom of assembly, against demonstrations, effectively, rules against the National Assembly. A lot of people are saying that part of the martial law declaration that came out a few hours ago was unconstitutional in any case. Was he legal? The president is allowed to declare emergency national law in certain circumstances in cases of grave emergency. The problem is that how you define a grave emergency is essentially down to the president. So that, strictly speaking, in declaring martial law, he was actually acting constitutionally.
OK. And we saw earlier that the South Korean military even prevented MPs from entering the parliament. They tried removing them and preventing them from voting. Did they actually have the power to do that?
If they're ordered by the president to do so under martial law, then possibly yes. But what struck me was, if you look at the scenes in Parliament, those soldiers really weren't trying very hard. I mean, they could easily have entered the building quickly and simply forced all the deputies out at bayonet point if necessary. They didn't do that. And indeed, when the Speaker of the National Assembly asked the soldiers to withdraw, they did so. I can't believe that the order to withdraw came from the presidential office. It looks as if senior officers had decided to follow the lead of the National Assembly rather than the president. If that's true, then President Yoon has a problem.
Interesting. John Everard, former British ambassador to North Korea. Thank you so much for joining me here on W News. Here's a reminder of our top stories. South Korean lawmakers have voted to lift martial law just hours after the country's president declared it. NATO accuses Russia of using Ukraine as a testing ground for experimental missiles, calling Putin's action reckless. And the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah is on the brink of collapse as airstrikes and mortar attacks are fired on either side. That's all from us on W News. Thank you for your company. Riz Khan is coming up next, and don't miss Tom Burgess-Watson with GNT. From all of us here, a very good night.